I can tell by all your comments that one thing a lot of people are concerned about is miscarriages of justice. And we've discussed some of the more sort of high-profile cases. But of course, there are tens of thousands of miscarriages of justice every year because of a particular procedure. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about something called a single justice procedure. So what I'd like to do is just briefly explain what that is, identify some of the problems, then point out some of the actual recommendations magistrates themselves have made to alleviate all these problems, and then what has happened with those recommendations. Spoiler, nothing. So what's the single justice procedure? Well, as the name suggests, it's a way of dealing with criminal cases involving a single justice. That is to say, one magistrate. And the idea behind it was to streamline things where it's like minor offences, whether it's road traffic offences, not having a television licence, not having your car taxed, where it's meant to be where there's, quote, no victim, and also where there's no possibility of a custodial sentence. The idea is that people can plead guilty and it will be dealt with on the papers by a single magistrate without anybody actually having to attend court. I think already you can probably see some of the issues there. But how does it work in practice? Well, if you are charged with one of these offences that fits, you'll be sent a piece of paper and it will actually say, do you wish for this to be dealt with by the single justice procedure? Now, you don't have to use the, I'm going to call it the SJP because that's what we all do. You don't have to use the SJP. You can say, no, I want my day in court. However, if you're going to plead guilty, it might be on a traffic thing where you go, like, I'm going to have to accept it's the 80 quid and 3 points. I may as well save the diesel and not to drive to the court. So yeah, I'll tick the box. I'll put my mitigation in. I'll say, how about speeding awareness course? And I'll just take my luck. How does it work in practice? Well, these are just like lay magistrates. So, they have no legal training whatsoever. And they're sat in a room with a big stack of papers and they just work their way through it. Now, it used to be that they would actually have with them what we now call a legal advisor, what I still call the court clerk. Your learned court clerk, I always like to describe them as. And somebody would sit with them and advise them as to the law. However, now they have to share. So they go off and sit in a room somewhere and there's a telephone and there's usually one advisor between 4 magistrates. Now, in some respects, the idea is it's great because you don't have to occupy a court. You can just stick them in a back room somewhere. You don't have to list things at particular times. It's just work through it as you wish. But the problem there is, of course, it's transparency. It's not heard in open court. There's a great guy though called Tristan Kirk, writes for the Evening Standard, and he's been campaigning about this and highlighting it through a series of brilliant articles. And it's fair to say that he has really raised awareness of this, and that's one of the reasons people are trying to address it. But what is the problem? Well, the problem is that neither the prosecutor nor the magistrate gets to see any mitigation you put in. They just see the paper saying this person committed the offence. What are you going to do about it? And usually they go, well, obviously guilty. Now, theoretically, they're supposed to look through and say, well, even though they've indicated guilty, either I don't find these facts amount to an offence, or as a matter of law it doesn't amount to an offence, or it may be, now having read all this personal mitigation, either I can impose a lower sentence or no sentence, or I can refer it back and say, I think actually you should take your chances at court on this one. But let me give you some examples. I mean, there's some terrible ones. A really bad one. Young lass, completely incapable of looking after herself, so she's in the care of the local authority, and they run her life. They forgot, they cancelled, when they were doing some of their bank account, they cancelled the direct debit that pays for her television licence. So she was prosecuted for not having a television licence. And the actual local council, they put a guilty plea in on her behalf. She didn't know anything about it. So this poor lass who's got no awareness of really what's happening in the world and relies entirely on other people, she was convicted. Now she has a sort of criminal record, even though she didn't know anything about it, and somebody else entered the guilty plea on her behalf, which actually shouldn't do, because if somebody doesn't have capacity to, handle criminal, trial proceedings themselves, then the usual procedure is they're not proceeded against. There may still be room for punishment, because you can have a hearing where you establish are the facts of the case established, but this person has no culpability because they just don't have the capacity to commit the offence. Another one, more recent one, farming family, old man shuffles off this mortal coil, and while they're sorting everything out and still grieving, turns out one of the tractors had run out of tax, and they were £5 in arrears on the tax. So yeah, they were prosecuted. There's another one where somebody, a young widower, a guy in his 20s, his wife dies, he's trying to sort everything out, he takes the kid to see Thomas the Tank Engine one day, but again, because it was her car, he hadn't realised it hadn't been sawned, it'd been sawned, so he was prosecuted. Now, it may well be that had they known all these facts, then they wouldn't have either been proceeded against, because before you can bring a matter to trial, it has to pass a two-part test. First of all, there has to be a realistic prospect of conviction, and that includes taking into account everything the defence might put forward. So it's not just there is a prima facie case. So if you wanted to get a case struck out in the Crown Court, you say there's no case to answer. In that particular case, they would look at just the prosecution evidence and say, even if everything the prosecution say is true, regardless of what the defence will say, there's no case to, there's just no hope of getting there. A properly directed jury or magistrate could not convict on this evidence. However, when they apply the test, they actually also take into account either known defences or anticipated defences. So they're supposed to look at, say, well, never mind if we've got a prima facie case, if we turn up and they come here and they say this, will we get conviction? Probably not. But the problem is, this material that would amount to a defence or mitigation, it's just not getting to either the prosecutors or the magistrates. Now, what some authorities have said, so the DVLA have now said, look, don't just, when you send this material back, don't just send it to the prosecutor, send it to us as well. And we'll link it up, because we'll take a view and we can let our people know and go, no, don't bother with this one. But it's all very arbitrary, isn't it? I mean, and like I say, there have literally been, there was a case, and when I say tens of thousands, that's true, because it transpired that they'd also used this procedure for people who were allegedly, quote, fare dodging on trains. And it wasn't, it was just like accepted that they'd honestly bought a ticket, but because of the confusion over when you can use it and things like that, they had the wrong ticket. Now, what's interesting there is they've said under the Railway Act, the railway offences, this sort of thing isn't actually a matter that can go to the courts. It can be dealt with sort of by their own revenue collection team, and they could sue you for it, but they can't prosecute you for it. And there were literally, I think it was 98,000 cases that they're now having to review and overturn, because they had to just dealt with it this way. And like I say, a lot of that time, people don't even know that they've been dealt with. They'll be driving along one day, get pulled by the police, and it's, oh, by the way, did you know you've got a fine outstanding, or did you know you've got some points? And it's like, no, I've got no idea. Because the other thing is, if they send the letter and you don't respond, they will just assume that you're happy for the single justice procedure to kick in. So anyway, so what have the magistrates themselves said? Well, it has been highlighted, and they've done a big report. They've had 12 recommendations. Now, I won't go through them all. What I'll do is I will link to their reports in the description below. But it's quite, it's things like, first of all, they're just saying they should be provided with all the material. So if somebody actually does put in some mitigation or a defence, they should be given it. They've also said that you should have actually sat for a magistrate for at least a year with other magistrates and the legal advisor before they let you loose on their own. They've asked for additional training. They've also said that these cases should be open to at least journalists to sit in and see what's happening, so they can report this, because there's a complete lack of transparency here, because you have no idea when or where this is being dealt with, because like I say, they just give a big stack of papers to a magistrate and go sit in a room somewhere. I mean, they actually do, for GDPR stuff, they actually have to do it in an official government building. They can't just take everything home for the weekend, because obviously, GDPR and, all that sort of, privacy of information kicks in. So, and there's lots of other 8 other recommendations, because I've done 4, 12 minus 4, 8. But I'll let you read those yourself, and I'll be very interested in your comments. I mean, like I say, I don't often give my opinion, but I can see why they brought the system in, and I can see why it could be useful if it worked properly, but the problem is it just doesn't work properly, and thousands, if not tens of thousands, of innocent people are ending up with criminal records because of stuff where they either didn't know about the procedure, or they sent off a defence that the justice would have said this amounts to a defence, so I can't deal with it. Feel free to have a trial if you want, or personal mitigation that would have said, well, I'm going to impose a lesser sentence, or indeed material where the prosecutor, if they got to see it, they might take a view and say this is not in the public interest. Actually, that's one of the other recommendations. They've said that there should be a specific duty. I mean, there's meant to be anyway, but they said there should be a specific duty. Prosecutors should be reminded, have a look at this. Don't just, go, oh, well, they've sent this, I'll just send it off to be dealt with. Have a look yourself and say, is it in the public interest to prosecute? Because they probably wouldn't be prosecuting grieving families or people who have no personal capacity and are being, effectively, under the court protection or in care. So there you go. But anyway, as always, hope you found that vaguely interesting, vaguely accurate, no doubt wildly infuriating. But yeah, this is one I'd be very interested in your thoughts on. So there you go. So where am I today? I've just came out to, just driving around, found some nice engine sheds. These are the Unity engine sheds. So what I'll do is I will spin that round so it faces that way, and then I will just show you these rather nice, magnificent engine sheds. So there you go. There's one of them off the way into the sky. There's the other one there. And some of you will know that I sometimes film at another engine shed that has a very, very tall chimney because they upgraded the boiler, so they needed to put a taller chimney in there. And I don't know if you can see it. Not even sure I can see it. There's some trees there. It's somewhere over there on the horizon. I'm shooting this in 4K, so feel free to zoom in, and yeah, I'll see you next time.